The millionaire gave his lunch to a little homeless black girl in the park. The next day, police knocked on his door saying that the girl had gone missing and that he was the prime suspect. The cold metal of the park bench sent a shiver through James Morrison's expensive wool suit pants. He sat down anyway, briefcase beside him, watching people hurry past on their lunch breaks. A courier on a bike zipped by. A group of office workers huddled around their phones, laughing at something on their screens. James pulled out his sandwich, wrapped in white paper from the deli down the street from his office building. The same sandwich he got every day, turkey on sourdough, no mayo. The bread crackled as he unwrapped it. His phone buzzed. Another email from the board about quarterly projections. James ignored it and took a bite of his sandwich, watching a pigeon hop closer to his feet. That's when he saw her again. The little girl sat 3 benches down, her legs dangling above the ground. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her pink jacket was too thin for the October chill, the sleeves frayed at the edges. Her hair was tied in uneven pigtails with mismatched rubber bands. James had noticed her here before, always alone, always watching people eat their lunches. Sometimes she'd pick up half-eaten sandwiches from the trash when she thought no one was looking. His stomach tightened. He glanced at his phone, 12:47. The quarterly meeting started at 1:30. Plenty of time to finish his lunch and get back. The girl's stomach growled loud enough that James could hear it from his bench. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to muffle the sound. "Damn it," James muttered. He stood up, his legs moving before his brain could talk him out of it. As he approached her bench, the girl's eyes widened. She scooted to the far edge, ready to bolt. "Hey there," James said, stopping a few feet away. "Would you like half of my sandwich? I'm not very hungry today." The girl stared at him, then at the sandwich, then back at him. She didn't speak. "It's turkey," James said. "On sourdough. From Giuseppe's Deli. Best sandwich place in the city." He kept his voice casual, like offering food to strange children was something he did every day. A woman walking by slowed down, frowning at them. James felt sweat prickle under his collar despite the cool air. The girl's stomach growled again. She glanced at the sandwich, then past James at something behind him. He resisted the urge to turn around. "My name's James," he said. "What's yours?" She hesitated. "Sarah," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "Nice to meet you, Sarah." James carefully tore the sandwich in half, making sure she got the bigger piece. He wrapped it back in the paper and held it out. Sarah's hand darted out like a small bird, snatching the sandwich. She clutched it to her chest. "Thank you," she said, still whispering. James nodded and started to turn away. "Wait," Sarah said. Her voice was a little stronger now. "Don't you want to know why I'm here?" James paused. "Do you want to tell me?" Sarah took a small bite of the sandwich, chewing slowly. "My mom's sick. She can't work right now. Sometimes there's not enough food at home." The words hit James in the gut. He saw himself at 10 years old, watching his own mother count pennies at the grocery store, putting items back one by one. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "That must be hard." Sarah shrugged, taking another bite. "The park's nice. People drop food sometimes." James felt sick. He reached for his wallet. "No," Sarah said quickly. "I don't want money. Mom says not to take money from strangers." "Smart mom," James said. He let his hand fall back to his side. "But you took my sandwich." "That's different," Sarah said. "You didn't just give it to me. You shared it." She smiled for the first time, revealing a missing front tooth. James's phone buzzed again. 1:03. He needed to head back soon. A woman in a navy blazer had stopped at a nearby bench. She was pretending to read something on her phone, but James could feel her watching them. "Listen, Sarah," he said quietly. "If you're ever really hungry, Giuseppe's Deli is just around the corner on 5th Street. Tell them James Morrison sent you. Okay? They'll make sure you get something to eat." Sarah's eyes lit up, then dimmed. "Mom says I shouldn't tell strangers where we live." "She's right about that too," James said. "You don't have to tell them anything. Just my name." The woman in the blazer was definitely watching them now. She'd taken out a small notebook. "I should go," James said. "Will you be okay?" Sarah nodded, already finishing the last bite of sandwich. "Thanks, Mr. James." "Just James is fine." He picked up his briefcase. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." As he walked away, he heard her humming quietly. The sound followed him down the path, past the woman in the blazer who was now writing something in her notebook. Back at his office, James couldn't focus on the quarterly projections. The image of Sarah picking through trash cans for food kept floating in front of the spreadsheets. His assistant Susan knocked on his door at 1:25. Board meeting in 5 minutes. Mr. Morrison. Thanks, Susan. James straightened his tie and gathered his papers. Everything okay, sir? You seem distracted. James thought about Sarah's frayed jacket sleeves, her uneven pigtails. Just thinking about lunch. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. James caught himself glancing out his office window toward the park several times. From the 47th floor, the benches looked like tiny matchsticks. At 6:30, Susan stuck her head in again. Heading out. Mr. Morrison, do you need anything else? No, thanks. Have a good night. After she left, James sat in the growing darkness of his office. The city lights were coming on, creating a grid of yellow squares in the buildings across the street. He picked up his phone and Googled how to help homeless children. The results made him pause. Various organizations, hotlines, warnings about not approaching children directly. He should have called someone, reported it, done something more official. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother. Dinner next week? Kids want to see Uncle James. James typed back a quick "sure" and returned to his search results. He clicked on a link about child services and began to read. The cleaning crew's vacuum in the hallway startled him. 8:45 p.m. He'd been reading for hours. On his way out, he stopped at the security desk. Hey, Mike, quick question. Have you noticed a little girl hanging around the park during lunch? African American, about 8 years old, pink jacket. Mike scratched his chin. Come to think of it. Yeah, been seeing her for a couple weeks now. Always by herself. You want me to call someone about it? No, James said quickly. Just curious. Have a good night. Outside, the October wind had picked up. James pulled his coat tighter and headed for the subway station. He thought about Sarah walking home in her thin jacket. He should have given her his card. Some way to contact him if she needed help. Too late now. But he'd look for her tomorrow. Make sure she was okay. Maybe bring an extra sandwich. The subway car was nearly empty. James leaned his head against the window, watching his reflection fade in and out against the darkness of the tunnel. In the glass, he saw himself at 12 years old, pretending he wasn't hungry, telling his mother he'd already eaten at a friend's house. His phone buzzed again. Another email from the board. Something about PR strategies and public image. James closed his eyes. He'd deal with it tomorrow. Right now, he just wanted to get home and figure out how to help a little girl in a pink jacket without making things worse. The subway rattled through the darkness, carrying him toward his empty penthouse apartment where he'd lie awake for hours, thinking about shared sandwiches and uneven pigtails, while somewhere in the city, a little girl named Sarah might be going to bed hungry. James woke up at 4:30 a.m., his sheets twisted around him. The TV in his bedroom was still on, muted news headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen. He'd fallen asleep watching local coverage, hoping to see anything about missing children or families needing help. His phone showed 3 missed calls from the board chairman. He ignored them and opened his weather app. 48 degrees. Too cold for a thin pink jacket. The sun wasn't up yet when he stopped at Giuseppe's Deli. The morning crew was just starting their prep work. Mr. Morrison, Mario called from behind the counter. Early today. The usual, 2 of them, James said. And Mario, if a little girl comes in, African American, about 8, pink jacket, make sure she gets something to eat. Put it on my tab. Mario wiped his hands on his apron. Sure thing, boss. She in trouble? I hope not. James handed over his credit card. Just looking out for someone who needs it. The park was empty at 6 a.m., frost coating the benches. James sat in his usual spot, briefcase beside him, watching the sunrise paint the buildings orange. No sign of Sarah. His phone buzzed. The board chairman again. James picked up this time. Morrison, he said. James, have you seen the morning news? No, why? Channel 7 is running a story about missing kids. They're talking about some creep hanging around the park, offering food to children. James's stomach dropped. What? Just watch it. And James? Stay away from that park for a while. The call ended. James pulled up the local news on his phone. A reporter stood in front of his park bench, microphone in hand. Sources say a well-dressed man has been seen approaching children here, offering them food. Police are investigating possible connections to recent disappearances in the area. Jesus Christ, James muttered. He looked around. The park was starting to fill with early morning joggers. A few of them glanced his way. His phone buzzed with a text from Susan. Mr. Morrison, PR team requesting emergency meeting. 8 a.m. James looked at the 2 sandwiches in his lap. He couldn't leave them. Sarah might come. A police car rolled slowly past the park. The officer inside made eye contact with James. The morning got worse from there. By 9 a.m., James sat in his office, watching 3 different news channels cover the story. Each version got more dramatic. The PR team huddled around his conference table, arguing about strategy. We need to get ahead of this, Karen from PR said. Issue a statement distancing the company from any inappropriate behavior. There was no inappropriate behavior, James snapped. I gave half my sandwich to a hungry kid. That's not how it looks, Karen said. Social media's going crazy. People are saying you're part of a trafficking ring. James's phone lit up with another text. His brother, dude, what the hell? Call me. The sandwiches sat untouched on his desk. It was past 10. Sarah usually came to the park around 11. Mr. Morrison. Susan poked her head in. There's a social worker here to see you. Says it's urgent. The woman from the park walked in, navy blazer replaced by a gray pantsuit. She held up a badge. Mr. Morrison? I'm Linda Chen from Child Protective Services. We need to talk about your interaction with a minor yesterday. James felt the room spin. The PR team went quiet. Everyone out, he said. Except MS. Chen. The team filed out. Linda sat across from James, pulling out her notebook. That girl, James said before she could speak. Sarah. She's hungry. Her mother's sick. Someone needs to help them. We're aware of the situation, Linda said. Her voice was gentler than he expected. But Mr. Morrison, approaching children directly isn't the way to handle it. There are procedures. Procedures. James stood up, pacing. She's digging through trash cans for food. How long do procedures take? Linda watched him move. You seem genuinely concerned. Of course I'm concerned. James stopped at the window. From up here, he could see 3 news vans parked by the park. I grew up poor. Not picking through trash poor, but poor enough. No kid should have to live like that. No, they shouldn't. Linda flipped through her notebook. Sarah Thompson. Mother's been out of work for 3 months. Father's not in the picture. They were in the system briefly but fell through the cracks. James turned. You know her full name? Where she lives? Mr. Morrison. Linda's voice sharpened. I cannot share that information. And you need to stay away from her. For her safety and yours. I just wanted to help. I believe you. But right now, you're making things worse. Linda stood up. Let us handle this through proper channels. James's phone buzzed again. The board chairman, emergency board meeting. 2 p.m. How long? James asked. How long will your proper channels take while she's hungry? Linda paused at the door. We're doing our best. Stay away from the park, Mr. Morrison. I mean it. After she left, James sank into his chair. His computer screen showed dozens of unread emails. The news channels kept playing footage of the park bench. At 11:30, he sent Susan out to check if Sarah was there. She came back shaking her head. No sign of her. But, Mr. Morrison, there are reporters asking about you now. They have pictures. James looked at the sandwiches on his desk. The bread was starting to get soggy. His brother called again. This time James answered. What were you thinking? His brother's voice was tight with worry. The kids are asking why Uncle James is on TV. Jenny's school called, asking if they should be concerned about me letting you around here. It's not what it looks like, James said. I was just trying to help. You can't help kids that aren't yours. Not anymore. Not in this world. James ended the call. His hand shook as he set the phone down. The afternoon board meeting was brutal. 12 faces stared at him across the mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concern to disgust. The optics are terrible, the chairman said. We're trending on Twitter. People are calling for boycotts. Over a sandwich. James's voice cracked. I shared my lunch with a hungry child. When did that become a crime? It became a problem when you did it alone, in public, without thinking about consequences. The chairman slid a paper across the table. We need you to take a leave of absence. Just until this blows over. James didn't touch the paper. And Sarah? What happens to her? That's not our concern. The chairman's tone softened slightly. James, you're a good man. But this is bigger than one child. We have shareholders to think about. Back in his office, James watched the sunset. His computer showed hundreds of social media posts, most calling him a predator. Some had found old photos of him, circling his face in red, adding sinister captions. Susan brought in the evening papers. His face was on the front page of two of them. The PR team drafted a statement, she said quietly. They want you to deny any interaction with the girl. Say you were just eating lunch. James picked up the soggy sandwiches and dropped them in the trash. Mr. Morrison. Susan lingered at the door. For what it's worth, I believe you were just trying to help. After she left, James pulled up property records on his computer. It took him 3 hours, but he finally found it. Sarah Thompson. Her mother, Angela Thompson. Their last known address was 6 blocks from the park. His phone buzzed with another news alert. Local CEO under investigation for suspicious behavior in park. James looked at the address on his screen. He could go there now. Explained to Sarah's mother. Try to help properly this time. Linda Chen's warning echoed in his head. Stay away. He was still staring at the address when his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Leave my daughter alone. The pounding on James's door started at 6 a.m. He was already awake, sitting in his dark kitchen, staring at his untouched coffee and the text message he'd read 100 times. Leave my daughter alone. NYPD. Open up. Mr. Morrison. James walked to his door slowly, like moving through water. 2 detectives stood in the hallway, badges out. Behind them, his neighbor Mrs. Chen peeked through her doorway in her bathrobe. James Morrison. The older detective had gray hair and tired eyes. I'm Detective Brooks. This is Detective Rodriguez. We need to ask you some questions about Sarah Thompson. James's throat went dry. Come in. They followed him to his living room. Rodriguez whistled softly at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Nice place, she said, but her tone wasn't friendly. What about Sarah? James sat down, his legs unsteady. Is she okay? Brooks pulled out a notebook. When was the last time you saw her? 2 days ago. In the park. I gave her half my sandwich because she was hungry. James leaned forward. Please, just tell me if she's okay. Sarah Thompson has been missing from the social services system for 3 weeks, Rodriguez said. Her mother reported her missing yesterday afternoon. The room tilted. Missing? But I just saw her. She said she lived with her mother. Yeah. Brooks's voice hardened. What else did she tell you? Nothing. Just that her mom was sick, couldn't work. That sometimes they didn't have enough food. And you didn't think to report this to anyone. Rodriguez paced near the windows. Just decided to handle it yourself. I told the deli to feed her if she came in. I was trying to help by luring her with food. Brooks stood up. We're going to need to look around. You need a warrant for that, James said automatically. We can get one. Brooks stepped closer. You want us to do this the hard way. James's phone rang. The board chairman again. Answer it, Rodriguez said. On speaker. James picked up. Hello. Turn on your TV, the chairman said. Channel 4. Rodriguez grabbed the remote before James could move. The TV flickered to life. A reporter stood outside James's building. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered, some holding signs. Sources say police are questioning Millionaire CEO James Morrison about his connection to the disappearance of 8-year-old Sarah Thompson. Morrison was last seen giving food to the child in Washington Square Park. Jesus. The chairman's voice crackled through the speaker. Tell me you didn't take that kid. Of course not. James shouted. I would never. Save it, Brooks cut in. End the call. James hung up. His phone immediately lit up with texts and missed calls. Rodriguez moved to his kitchen, opening cabinets. Brooks stayed in the living room, watching James. You have access to a private jet? Brooks asked. Through the company? Yes. It been used recently? What? No. I didn't take her anywhere. James stood up. Look at the security cameras. Check my phone. I'm trying to help. Sit down, Mr. Morrison. Brooks's hand moved to his hip, near his gun. James sat. His phone kept buzzing. Detective. Rodriguez called from the kitchen. You need to see this. Brooks walked over. James heard them whispering. Mr. Morrison, Rodriguez came back, holding a pink hair tie. Want to explain this? James stared at it. That's not. I've never seen that before. Found it under your sink, Rodriguez said. Lab can tell us if it matches Sarah's DNA. Someone planted that, James said. His voice sounded far away. I never brought her here. A commotion erupted in the hallway. Through his open door, James saw reporters pushing past the elevator, cameras flashing. Back door, Brooks said to Rodriguez. Call for backup. James's phone rang again. This time it was Linda Chen. Don't answer, Brooks warned. But James was already hitting the green button. Linda? What's happening? Where is she? Linda's voice shook. Just tell me she's safe. I don't have her. I never had her. I just gave her a sandwich. The reporters were at his door now, shouting questions. Camera flashes lit up his apartment like lightning. Mr. Morrison, Brooks said. Get your coat. We're going downtown. James's hands trembled as he stood up. I want a lawyer. Good idea, Rodriguez said. She held up an evidence bag with a pink hair tie. You're gonna need one. The elevator ride down was silent. James watched the floor numbers tick by, remembering Sarah counting her sandwich bites carefully, making them last. In the lobby, more reporters waited. The police pushed through them, keeping James between them. Did you take her? What did you do with Sarah? Is it true you're part of a trafficking ring? Camera flashes blinded him. Someone threw something that hit his shoulder. The police car waited at the curb, lights flashing. As Brooks opened the back door, James saw a woman across the street. She held a sign with Sarah's school picture on it. It hit him then, really hit him, that Sarah was missing. That somewhere out there, a little girl in a pink jacket might be cold, or scared, or worse. And everyone thought he was responsible. The precinct was chaos. Phones ringing, officers rushing past, everyone staring at him. They put him in a small room with a metal table. Wait here, Brooks said, like James had a choice. His phone was gone. His suit jacket too. The metal chair was cold, like the park bench had been. Time stretched. James counted ceiling tiles. Thought about Sarah counting sandwich bites. The door opened. A man in an expensive suit walked in. Mr. Morrison? I'm David Cohen. The board sent me. Don't say another word to anyone. I need to tell them. Nothing, Cohen cut him off. You say nothing. More waiting. James thought about the text message. Sarah's mother knew where to find his number. What else did she know? Brooks and Rodriguez came back with a file folder. Your lawyer's here, Brooks said. But first, look at these. He spread photos across the table. Security camera stills from the park. James on his bench. Sarah on hers. James walking toward her. Looks bad, doesn't it? Rodriguez said. Rich man approaching a poor kid alone. Stop, Cohen said. My client is done talking. Fine. Brooks gathered the photos. But he's not going anywhere. They left James and Cohen alone. Through the wall, he heard phones ringing, voices arguing. The company jet, Cohen said. Did you use it? No. I told them. Shut up. Cohen checked his phone. Press is going crazy. Stocks down 12%. Board's meeting right now. James put his head in his hands. What about Sarah? Is anyone actually looking for her? That's not your problem anymore. Cohen stood up. Don't talk to anyone. Don't try to help. You've done enough damage. After Cohen left, James sat alone in the room for hours. His stomach growled. He thought about his sandwich wrapper in the trash can. Sarah's careful bites. The door opened again. Linda Chen walked in. 2 minutes, she said. Your lawyer's arguing with my boss. Linda, please. I didn't. I know. She sat down. But Sarah's still missing. And you're still the last person seen with her. Let me help find her. You can't. Linda leaned forward. Listen to me. Sarah's mother has a history. Drug charges. Lost custody before. Got Sarah back 6 months ago. Said they were staying with friends. But the address was fake. Why are you telling me this? Because someone needs to actually look for Sarah. Linda stood up. But it can't be you. Not anymore. She left. James stared at the wall, thinking about Sarah's mother's text. About fake addresses and lost custody. The door opened one last time. Brooks walked in with handcuffs. James Morrison, he said. You're under arrest for the suspected kidnapping of Sarah Thompson. The metal was cold against James's wrists. Like the park bench. Like Sarah's hungry eyes. Somewhere in the city, a little girl was missing. And James Morrison, who'd only wanted to help, was now the reason no one was really looking for her. The holding cell smelled like bleach and sweat. James sat on the metal bench, his $3,000 suit wrinkled, his tie confiscated along with his shoelaces. Across the cell, a drunk man snored on the floor. "Morrison," a guard called. "Your lawyer's here." They led him to a different room this time. Bigger table. No cameras. Cohen sat with a woman James didn't recognize. "This is Patricia Wells," Cohen said, "your new criminal defense attorney." Patricia had gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. She looked like someone's grandmother, but her eyes were sharp as she studied James. "They are holding you for 48 hours, she said. "No bail hearing until Monday. Tell me everything. From the beginning." James started with the park bench. Sarah's thin jacket. The sandwich. His phone buzzed in the evidence bag on the table. "Don't answer it," Cohen said. "Can't anyway," the guard by the door said. "Evidence." Patricia took notes while James talked. His voice cracked when he got to Sarah's mother's text. "Did you trace the number?" she asked. "Police have my phone records," James said. "But they are not looking. They think they've already found their guy." Cohen's phone chimed. He checked it and swore. "Stocks down 20%. Board's calling for an emergency vote." "Focus," Patricia snapped. "Mr. Morrison, did Sarah say anything else? Any details about where she lived, her mother's condition?" James closed his eyes, remembering. "She said her mom couldn't work, that sometimes there wasn't food at home. And you didn't report this." "I was going to. I looked up resources that night. Then the news story broke, and the police came, and the door opened." Detective Rodriguez walked in with a file. "Hair tie's not a match," she said. "Loud just confirmed." James sagged with relief. "I told you. Doesn't mean you're clear." Rodriguez cut him off. "Someone planted evidence to frame you. Makes us wonder why." Patricia stood up. "Are you charging my client?" "Not yet. But he's not leaving." Cohen's phone chimed again. His face went pale. "They're calling for a vote of no confidence." "James, I need a statement from you. Something we can release to calm the shareholders." "No statements," Patricia said. "Not until—" A commotion erupted outside. Raised voices. Running feet. The guard stuck his head in. "Detectives? You need to see this." Rodriguez left. Through the open door, James heard a TV news report. Breaking news in the Sarah Thompson case. Security footage has emerged showing the 8-year-old getting into a black SUV near Washington Square Park on the day of her disappearance. Police are asking for help identifying the vehicle. "That's not my car," James said quickly. "I take the subway." "We know," Rodriguez said from the doorway. "Car was reported stolen 2 weeks ago. Found abandoned in New Jersey an hour ago." James stood up. "Then why am I still here?" "Sit down," Patricia and Cohen said together. Rodriguez walked back in, closing the door. "You're here because someone went to a lot of trouble to frame you. The hair tie. The media leaks. Someone wanted us focused on you instead of looking for Sarah." James's head spun. "Her mother. The text. Can't you trace it?" "Burn a phone," Rodriguez said. "Dead end." Cohen's phone chimed yet again. He stepped out to take the call. "Think," Patricia said to James. "Who would want to frame you? Business rivals? Personal enemies?" James ran his hands through his hair. 48 hours in custody had left it greasy and tangled. "I don't know. The company's had some hostile takeover attempts, but nothing serious. My personal life is boring. I work. I eat lunch in the park. I go home." "The park," Rodriguez said slowly. "How long have you been eating lunch there?" 6 months? Maybe 7. Every day. Most days. So you've seen things. People. Activities." James looked up. "What are you getting at?" "That park's a known drug-dealing spot," Rodriguez said. "Low-level stuff. Mostly. But lately there's been talk of something bigger. Human trafficking ring using homeless kids as runners." The drunk man's snores echoed down the hall. James felt sick. "Sarah," he whispered. "Was she?" "We don't know," Rodriguez said. "But her mother's history, the drugs, the fake addresses, it fits a pattern." Cohen burst back in, his face red. "They voted. It's done. James, you're out. Effective immediately." The words didn't register at first. "What?" "The board voted unanimously. You're no longer CEO. They're announcing it in 10 minutes. James stared at his hands. His gold watch was in an evidence bag somewhere. but the tan line remained. What about Sarah? For God's sake, Cohen exploded. Forget about Sarah. You've lost everything because you couldn't mind your own business. Mr. Cohen, Patricia said quietly. I think you should leave. After Cohen stormed out, the room fell silent except for the distant snores. Detective, James said finally. The drug ring. The traffickers. Is that why someone planted the hair tie? To stop me from telling what I'd seen. Maybe, Rodriguez said. But you didn't see anything, did you? Just a hungry kid in the park. James thought back over months of lunch breaks. People walking past his bench. Conversations he'd half heard. Small exchanges he'd dismissed. There was a man, he said slowly. Came to the park every Tuesday. Always wore a Yankees cap. Made calls on different phones. Rodriguez pulled out her notebook. What else? Kids would talk to him sometimes. Quick conversations. He'd give them something small. I thought maybe he was a teacher or social worker. Jesus Christ, Patricia muttered. James's stomach lurched. Sarah. She talked to him once. Last week, I think. Before the sandwich. Rodriguez was writing fast. Why didn't you mention this before? I didn't think it mattered. I was focused on Sarah being hungry, not some guy in a baseball cap. The door opened again. Detective Brooks looked in. Rodriguez. Now. She left quickly. James turned to Patricia. What happens now? Now. She took off her glasses. Now we wait. And hope they find Sarah before it's too late. James put his head in his hands. He saw Sarah's small fingers clutching the sandwich paper. Heard her careful whisper. Mom says not to take money from strangers. Had she taken something from the man in the Yankees cap? His life was in ruins. His career over. His reputation destroyed. And somewhere in the city, a little girl might be in danger because he'd been watching her talk to a stranger in a baseball cap, and he'd only noticed she was hungry. The drunk man's snores stopped. Down the hall, phones kept ringing. Brooks and Rodriguez's voices rose and fell. James Morrison, former CEO, sat in a police station interview room, waiting to find out if trying to help one hungry child had led to her disappearance. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Saturday became Sunday. 48 hours to go. Sunday morning brought no relief. James paced his holding cell, his socks sliding on the concrete floor. His shoes sat in an evidence locker somewhere, along with his life. Morrison, a guard called. Visitor. Linda Chen waited in the interview room. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept either. You look terrible, she said. Thanks. James sat down, his sock feet cold against the floor. Any news? Yankees cap guy is Maurice Peterson. Known trafficking recruiter. Been on our radar for months. James's stomach turned. Sarah. No sign yet. But we found her mother. Linda opened a file. Angela Thompson was picked up trying to cross into Canada. She's being brought back now. She knew, James said. She had to know what was happening to Sarah. Probably. These rings, they target vulnerable families. Offer money, drugs, whatever the parents need. Get the kids to run packages. Then one day, the kids disappear. James slammed his hand on the table. The guard by the door stepped forward. Easy, Linda said. Sorry. James lowered his voice. How long has this been happening in my park? Your park? Linda raised an eyebrow. You know what I mean. I sat there every day, ate my sandwich, checked my emails. Never saw what was happening right in front of me. Until Sarah. Yeah. James rubbed his face. His stubble was turning into a beard. Until I finally looked up and saw someone besides myself. The door opened. Patricia walked in with a paper bag. Brought you some clothes, she said. And news. They're releasing you. James stared at her. What? Angela Thompson confessed. Said Maurice Peterson paid her to frame you. The hair tie, the media leaks, all of it. They needed a distraction while they moved their operation. And Sarah? Patricia and Linda exchanged looks. Still missing, Linda said. But now we know what we're dealing with. Peterson's ring moves kids through a network of safe houses. Changes locations every few days. How many kids? James asked. At least 12 confirmed missing in the past year. James felt the number like a physical blow. 12 kids. How many had he seen in the park? How many conversations had he ignored? I need to help find them, he said. No, Patricia and Linda said together. You're radioactive right now, Patricia added. Media's still camped outside your building. Stocks in freefall. Board's appointed an interim CEO. I don't care about any of that. You should, Linda said. Because right now, you can't help anyone. You need to go home, lay low, and let us do our jobs. The guard brought James's shoes and watch. His phone had 57 missed calls. Your brother's been trying to reach you, Patricia said. And the interim CEO wants to meet. Tell them all to wait. James put his shoes on slowly. I need to do something first. James, Linda warned. Just hear me out. He looked at both women. Peterson's ring needs money to operate, right? Safe houses, transport, payoffs. Yes, Linda said cautiously. So follow the money. I know banking, investment patterns, shell companies. Let me help with that part, at least. From home. No public involvement. Patricia shook her head. Any connection to you could compromise the investigation. Then don't connect it to me. Linda can pass information through you. Patricia. Attorney-client privilege. The women looked at each other again. It could work, Linda said finally. We're stretched thin on the financial side. 2 conditions, Patricia said. You stay completely out of sight. And you let me handle all communication. James nodded. Done. Outside the station, reporters swarmed. Patricia's car waited at the curb, windows tinted. Mr. Morrison, did you kill Sarah Thompson? What do you say to accusations of trafficking? Is it true the board forced you out? James kept his head down. The car door closed on the shouted questions. Here. Patricia handed him a burner phone. Untraceable. I'll text you when I have information. The drive to his building took twice as long. More reporters waited there. Back entrance, James said. In his apartment, everything looked different. Forensics had been thorough. Drawers hung open. Cushions sat askew. His laptop was gone. They'll return your electronics once they are cleared, Patricia said. I'll have a new laptop delivered. Clean. For the financial research only. James walked to his window. The park looked small from up here. Sarah's bench was just a dot. She counted her bites, he said quietly. What? The sandwich. Sarah. She made each bite last. Like she didn't know when she'd eat again. He turned to Patricia. How did I sit there every day and not see what was happening? You saw eventually, Patricia said. That's why they had to frame you. You noticed. You cared. You disrupted their operation. And now Sarah's gone. We'll find her. Patricia headed for the door. Check the burner phone tonight. Linda's sending the first batch of financial records. Alone, James stood at his window until sunset. His regular phone was still in evidence, but he could imagine the messages. The board. The press. His brother. The burner phone buzzed at midnight. A text from Patricia. Files attached. Shell companies. Money transfers. Last 6 months. Start digging. James grabbed the new laptop. Names and numbers filled the screen. Wire transfers. Property records. LLC registrations. Somewhere in these numbers was a path to Sarah. To all the children he hadn't seen. Eating his lunch in a park where kids disappeared. His apartment was quiet except for his typing. Dawn came, then noon. James kept working. No sandwich today. No park bench. Just numbers that might lead to a little girl who'd made each bite last. A pattern emerged. Small transfers. Different banks. Always on Tuesdays. Yankees cap guys park visits. Tuesday calls on different phones. James's fingers flew across the keyboard. Following the money. Following Sarah's path through a system he should have seen sooner. The burner phone buzzed again. Patricia. What did you find? James looked at his notes. At the map of transactions he'd built. I know where they're moving the money, he texted back. And I think I know where they're moving the kids. James sat in Patricia's office, spreading papers across her desk. 3 days of non-stop financial analysis had left him unshaven and hollow-eyed, but his hands were steady as he pointed to the patterns. Every Tuesday, like clockwork. Small deposits into different accounts. Always under 10,000 to avoid reporting requirements. But follow them backward. He traced a line through the paperwork. They all originate from shell companies registered to empty storefronts in Queens. Patricia studied the documents. And you're sure about this? I built my company reading patterns like these. See these addresses? He circled 3 locations. They're all closed businesses, but they are paying utilities. High electricity usage. Central air running full blast in empty buildings. The door opened. Linda Chen walked in with Detective Rodriguez. Show them, Patricia said. James laid out his evidence. The shell companies, the money trails, the utility bills. Safe houses, Rodriguez said quietly. Keeping kids cool in summer, warm in winter, paid for through a maze of fake businesses. James pulled up a map on his laptop. 3 locations active right now, all connected to companies that made deposits last Tuesday. Linda leaned over the map. These are outside our search grid. We've been looking in the wrong places. That's why they framed me, James said. Keep the police focused on Manhattan while they move the kids to Queens. And Sarah? Rodriguez asked. James pointed to the newest utility bill. Power usage spiked here 3 days ago. Right after she disappeared, the room fell silent except for the hum of Patricia's office air conditioning. We need warrants, Rodriguez said finally. Judges. Tactical teams. That takes time, James said. We do this by the book, Linda cut in. Or the whole case falls apart. James stood up, pacing. Every hour we wait is an hour we use to build a solid case, Patricia finished. Sit down, James. He sat. His hands shook now. The burner phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stay out of it. James showed the phone to Rodriguez. They know you're helping us, she said. Phone's compromised. Dump it. James dropped the phone in Patricia's trash can. What now? Now you go home, Linda said. Let us handle the raids. But no buts. Patricia gathered the papers. You've done your part. More than you should have, legally speaking. Go home. Outside, the October wind had turned bitter. James's driver waited at the curb. Patricia had insisted he stop taking the subway until things calmed down. Home, Mr. Morrison, the driver asked. James looked at his watch. 2:47 p.m. Around this time yesterday, he'd been tracing wire transfers. Around this time last week, he'd been eating lunch in the park. Take the long way, he said. They drove past his old office building. Past the park where Sarah's bench sat empty. Past Giuseppe's deli where Mario was probably making sandwiches, still watching for a little girl in a pink jacket. The burner phone was gone, but James remembered the text. They knew he was helping. Which meant, stop the car, he said suddenly. Sir, here is fine. James got out near a convenience store. Take the rest of the day off. Inside the store, he bought a prepaid phone. The clerk didn't recognize him, a small mercy of his unshaven state. On the sidewalk, James dialed the number he'd memorized from the evidence file. 2 rings. 3. Hello. A woman's voice, rough from crying or something worse. Angela Thompson. A pause. Who is this? James Morrison. The man you helped frame. I can't. They'll know I'm talking to you. They already know I'm helping the police. Tell me where Sarah is. They'll kill her. Angela's voice cracked. They showed me pictures. Said if I didn't help set you up. The police know about the safe houses, James said. They're getting warrants right now. But Sarah might be moved before they arrive. Help me find her. I can't. You're her mother. I'm a junkie who sold out her kid. Angela was crying now. Peterson got me hooked again. Promised to keep Sarah safe if I played along. But then she saw something she shouldn't have. In the park. Last Tuesday. James's heart pounded. What did she see? A drop gone wrong. Man died. Peterson's guy stabbed him behind the bathrooms. Sarah was there. She saw everything. Jesus. James leaned against the store window. Why didn't you go to the police? Peterson said he'd kill her if I did. Said framing you was her only chance. Rich white guy going down for taking a black kid? Media would eat it up. Keep everyone distracted. A police car rolled past. James turned away from the street. Angela, listen to me. Sarah's running out of time. Once Peterson knows the police are coming. The warehouse, she whispered. Not the safe houses. They are moving all the kids tonight. To the warehouse. What warehouse? By the river. Peterson's brother owns it. Shipping company. Green Harbor Marine. James was already walking. Phone pressed to his ear. Address. 4721 Vernon Boulevard. Queens. Angela's voice shook. Please. Find her. Tell her I'm sorry. I will. James flagged down a taxi. Angela, get somewhere safe. Tell the police everything you told me. He ended the call as the taxi pulled up. 4721 Vernon Boulevard, he said. Fast as you can. The driver nodded, pulling into traffic. James's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He should call Rodriguez. Linda. Patricia. Let them handle it properly, legally. But he saw Sarah counting sandwich bites. Heard Angela's voice. They're moving all the kids tonight. The taxi hit traffic near the bridge. Faster, James said. Please. His phone could be tracked. He turned it off, watching the river get closer through the taxi window. The warehouse appeared ahead. Green Harbor Marine painted on the side in fading letters. 3 black SUVs parked outside. Stop here, James said. He paid in cash, adding $100 tip. You were never here. The driver nodded, pulling away. James stood on the sidewalk, staring at the warehouse. No guard outside. They weren't expecting trouble here. Sarah was inside. Maybe others too. Kids who should have been in school or playing in parks, not vanishing into Peterson's maze of shell companies and safe houses. He should wait for the police. A truck backed up to the warehouse loading dock. Men started moving crates inside. James thought of Sarah's careful whisper. Mom says not to take money from strangers. He walked toward the warehouse. No plan. No weapon. No backup. Just a man who'd shared his sandwich with a hungry child, trying one last time to help. The warehouse air smelled like fish and diesel. James slipped inside through a side door, keeping to the shadows between stacked crates. Voices echoed from deeper inside, men shouting orders, the beep of a forklift backing up. His expensive leather shoes made no sound on the concrete floor. One good thing about spending too much on footwear. Get those crates loaded. A man's voice carried across the warehouse. Peterson wants everything out by midnight. James crouched behind a stack of boxes. His suit pants, wrinkled from days in a holding cell, pulled tight across his knees. Movement caught his eye. A small figure darted between crates on the far wall. Pink jacket. James's heart stopped. Sarah was alive. She was here. More movement. Other children, moving like shadows between the boxes. 5, no, 6 of them, being herded toward the loading dock by men in dark clothes. A door slammed somewhere above. Footsteps on metal stairs. Maurice. The voice was sharp, authoritative. Coast Guard patrol in 30 minutes. Get those kids on the boat. James looked up. A catwalk ran along the warehouse walls. A man in a Yankees cap, Maurice Peterson, stood at the railing, talking to someone James couldn't see. We're moving as fast as we can, Peterson said. Thompson's kid is being difficult. Then sedate her like the others. Can't risk her talking about what she saw. Sarah wasn't walking like the other children. She kept stopping, fighting against the man pushing her forward. James pulled out his phone. His hands shook as he turned it on. No signal. Damn it, he whispered. A child started crying somewhere in the darkness. Shut that kid up, Peterson shouted from above. James had to do something. Call for help. Create a distraction. Anything. A guard walked past his hiding spot, gun visible under his jacket. James waited until the guard turned the corner, then moved closer to the loading dock. The crying got louder. I want my mom. A boy's voice, young and terrified. One more sound and you'll never see her again, a man growled. James reached the last row of crates. 20 feet of open space separated him from the loading dock. From Sarah. She saw him. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened. James pressed a finger to his lips. Sarah gave a tiny nod. She stumbled, falling to her knees. Get up. The man behind her grabbed her arm. I can't, Sarah said. I'm too sleepy. The man cursed. Peterson. This one's fighting the drugs. James looked around desperately. He needed a distraction. A weapon. Something. His phone. He turned the volume all the way up. Dialed 911 even though there was no signal. Then he threw it as hard as he could at the far wall. The phone shattered with a crack that echoed through the warehouse. What was that? Peterson leaned over the catwalk railing. Guards moved toward the sound. Away from the children. Sarah was watching James. Waiting. He pointed at a door marked emergency exit near the loading dock. She shook her head. Pointed at the other children. All of them, James mouthed. Sarah nodded. She grabbed the hand of the crying boy next to her. James picked up a piece of pipe from behind a crate. His fingers wrapped around the cold metal. Nothing here. A guard called from where the phone had broken. Check the perimeter, Peterson ordered. No one gets in or out until those kids are on the boat. Now or never. James stood up and threw the pipe as hard as he could at the warehouse windows. Glass shattered. Alarms blared. Run, he shouted. Sarah pulled the boy with her. Other children started moving. Stop them! Peterson screamed. James ran into the open, drawing attention away from the kids. A guard raised his gun. James tackled him. They hit the ground hard. The gun skittered away. More glass broke as children found things to throw at windows. The hell? Peterson leaned over the railing. Is that Morrison? James rolled away from the guard, his ribs screaming where he'd hit the floor. Sarah was leading kids toward the emergency exit. A guard blocked their path. James grabbed a wooden pallet and swung it like a shield, charging the guard. They crashed into a stack of crates. Fish spilled across the floor. Go! James shouted at Sarah. Get them out! She shoved the emergency door open. Alarms kept blaring. Stop them! Peterson was running down the stairs. Shoot him! James slipped on fish guts, scrambling behind a forklift. Bullets pinged off metal. Through the emergency door, he saw children running into the night. Police! Drop your weapons! Rodriguez's voice boomed through a megaphone outside. How? Peterson screamed. James grinned despite the pain in his ribs. Sarah must have had a phone. Must have called while pretending to be drugged. Smart girl. Footsteps pounded on concrete as guards tried to flee. The loading dock door crashed open. SWAT team members poured in. Down on the ground. James stayed behind the forklift, hands raised. Peterson ran for a back door. Detective Brooks tackled him. Yankee's cap went flying. James? Rodriguez appeared beside the forklift. What the hell are you doing here? Helping, he managed. His ribs felt like fire. You're under arrest, she said. Again. I know. Outside, he heard Sarah's voice. He came back for us. Mr. James came back. Rodriguez helped him up. You could have been killed. Had to try. James winced. Did they get all the kids out? 8 total. All alive. Rodriguez cuffed him, but gently. Including Sarah. Through the broken windows, James saw Linda Chen wrapping a blanket around Sarah's shoulders. Other children huddled with paramedics. Parents would be called. Families reunited. Worth it, James said. Peterson cursed as Brooks led him past in cuffs. Sarah broke away from Linda and ran to James. You came back, she said. Told you I'd help if you were hungry. Sarah hugged him around the waist, careful of his hands cuffed behind his back. Your mom's safe, he told her. She helped us find you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She did. She loves you. Even when she makes mistakes. Rodriguez tugged his arm. Time to go. Am I in trouble? Sarah asked. No, James said. You're very brave. And very smart. What about you? James looked at Rodriguez. Am I in trouble? Breaking and entering. Interfering with a police investigation. Violating about 12 laws. Rodriguez sighed. But you helped save 8 kids. We'll figure something out. Outside, reporters were arriving. Cameras flashed. Mr. Morrison, did you rescue the children? How did you find them? Sarah squeezed his hand. I'll tell them you're good. That you just wanted to help. James smiled through his pain. Thanks, Sarah. Linda led her toward a waiting ambulance. One thing, Rodriguez said as she helped him into a police car. How did you know they'd be here? Angela Thompson told me. Sarah saw Peterson kill someone last Tuesday. That's why they had to move the kids. Rodriguez nodded. We found the body an hour ago. Behind the park bathrooms. James watched Sarah through the car window. She was talking to paramedics, still wrapped in Linda's blanket. You know what's funny? He said. All this started because I shared my sandwich. No, Rodriguez closed the car door. It started because you finally looked up and saw someone besides yourself. The police car pulled away from the warehouse. Behind them, children were going home. Sarah was safe. And James Morrison, former CEO, was going back to jail. He couldn't stop smiling. The courthouse corridor felt colder than James's holding cell had. He sat on a wooden bench, Patricia beside him, watching people hurry past in suits and uniforms. Prosecution's offering a deal, Patricia said. 6 months probation. No jail time. James rubbed his ribs, still saw 2 weeks after the warehouse. What's the catch? You have to stay away from the park. And Sarah. No. James. No deal. He straightened his tie. His first one in weeks. I want to testify. Patricia sighed. The media will crucify you. Let them. Those kids deserve to be heard. Down the hall, doors opened. Sarah walked in with Linda Chen and a woman James recognized from photos, Angela Thompson, clean and nervous in a borrowed suit. Mom! Sarah ran to her mother. Angela hugged her daughter, crying. I'm so sorry. Baby. I'm so sorry. James looked away. Patricia touched his arm. They are both testifying today too, she said. Angela turned state's evidence. She's getting treatment instead of jail time. Good. James meant it. Sarah spotted him. She whispered something to her mother, then walked over. Hi, Mr. James. Hi, Sarah. Nice dress. She smoothed the blue fabric. Linda got it for court. Mom's getting better. She's been clean 2 weeks. I'm glad. Sarah studied his face. Are you in trouble for helping us? A little. But it's okay. That's not fair. Sarah frowned. You saved us. The police saved you. I just helped a little. No. Sarah's voice got stronger. You saw me when no one else did. You shared your food. You came back. James felt his throat tighten. The bailiff called Sarah's name. I have to go tell the truth now, she said. You'll do great. Sarah hugged him quickly, then ran to Linda. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the back rows. Peterson and his men sat in orange jumpsuits, surrounded by guards. James watched Sarah take the stand. She looked tiny in the big wooden chair. Please state your name, the prosecutor said. Sarah Louise Thompson. Can you tell us what happened in the park that Tuesday? Sarah's voice shook at first, then steadied. She told them everything. The man Peterson killed. The threats. The warehouse. And Mr. Morrison, the prosecutor asked. What did he do? Sarah sat straighter. He was the first person who saw me. Really saw me. Not just a poor kid or a black kid or a hungry kid. Just me. In the gallery, Angela Thompson wiped her eyes. He shared his sandwich, Sarah continued. Then when the bad men took us, he found us. He fought them. He got hurt helping us escape. Even though he'd been arrested once already, the prosecutor asked. He didn't care about that. He cared about us. Peterson's lawyer tried to twist Sarah's words during cross-examination. She didn't break. Angela testified next. The drugs. The threats. The frame-up. They said they'd kill Sarah if I didn't help trap Mr. Morrison, she said. But then he called me. Said he'd find her. And he did. James took the stand last. Why did you get involved? The prosecutor asked. Because I saw a hungry child, James said simply. Everything else, the investigation, the warehouse, all of it, came from that moment. I couldn't walk away, even when it cost you everything. Your job? Your reputation. James looked at Sarah in the gallery. Some things matter more than reputations. The verdict took 3 hours. Peterson and his men, guilty on all counts. Trafficking, murder, kidnapping. James's charges, dismissed in light of his assistance to law enforcement. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Mr. Morrison, will you return as CEO? Are you starting a children's charity? What's next for you? Sarah pushed through the crowd. She held something wrapped in white paper. Here, she said. From Giuseppe's Deli. Turkey on sourdough. James took the sandwich. Want to share? They sat on the courthouse steps, tearing the sandwich in half. Cameras flashed around them. Mom's going to meetings, Sarah said between bites. Linda helped her find a job too. That's wonderful. We can't go back to our old place though. James chewed slowly. I might know somewhere. Building I own downtown. Empty apartment on the 3rd floor. Sarah's eyes widened. Really? If your mom's interested. Plenty of good schools nearby. And the park. 10-minute walk. Sarah smiled. Can we have lunch there sometimes? When mom's at work. I'd like that. James looked at the reporters still watching them. Though maybe we should bring more sandwiches. Seems like there are a lot of hungry people we haven't noticed yet. Angela walked over, Linda beside her. Sarah? Time to go. Sarah hugged James. See you in the park. Count on it. He watched them leave, Linda leading them to a waiting car. Patricia appeared with his coat. Ready? Almost. James pulled out his phone, a new one, unlocked. He dialed his old office. Put me through to the board, he said. James, Patricia warned. He held up a hand. Hello, everyone. I'm not coming back as CEO. But I do have a proposal about starting a foundation. And I'm not taking no for an answer. The sandwich paper crinkled in his hand. On the courthouse steps, in front of cameras and reporters, James Morrison smiled and began to share his lunch again. This time, with the whole city. 1 month later, James stood in the park, watching kids play during their lunch break. The November wind carried dried leaves across the grass, but the sun was warm on his face. His phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Thompson apartment inspection passed. All set for move-in. He smiled, typing back, "Thanks. I'll let them know." The park had changed. New benches, better lighting, signs with helpline numbers and resources for families in need. The James Morrison Foundation's first project. Mr. James. Sarah ran across the grass, her new winter coat bright against the gray day. "Mom got the keys." "I heard." He pulled a paper bag from behind his back. "Celebration lunch." Sarah's face lit up. "Giuseppe's." "Of course." "Mario says hi, by the way." They sat on their bench, freshly painted, but still the same one where it all started. Sarah took her half of the sandwich carefully, old habits dying hard. "The moving truck's coming tomorrow," she said. Linda helped Mom pack everything. "Need any help unpacking?" "Mom says you've done too much already." James watched a police car roll past, Rodriguez and Brooks on their regular patrol. They waved. "Your mom started her new job yet?" he asked. Sarah nodded, chewing. "At the shelter. She likes it. Says it helps her stay clean, helping other people. She's strong. Like her daughter." Sarah grinned, then turned serious. "Why'd you do it? Help us? I mean, even when everyone thought you were bad." James considered the question. A month ago, he would have had a complicated answer. "Now, because you were hungry," he said simply. Sometimes that's enough reason to help. Across the park, a woman sat alone on a bench, 2 small children beside her. They watched people eating lunch. Sarah followed his gaze. "They look hungry too." "Yeah, they do." James pulled 2 extra sandwiches from his bag. "Want to help?" Sarah was already standing. "That's what the foundation's for, right?" They walked over together. The woman tensed, pulling her children closer. "Hi," Sarah said brightly. "I'm Sarah. This is Mr. James. Would you like to share our lunch?" The woman hesitated. We can't pay." "It's not about paying," James said. "It's about sharing." He handed her a card with the foundation's information as Sarah gave them the sandwiches. "There's a shelter 3 blocks over," he said. "Ask for Angela Thompson. She'll help you find what you need." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Back on their bench, Sarah finished her sandwich. "Mom says you're not rich anymore." "Not like before," James agreed. "Had to sell some things. Houses, cars, stuff I didn't really need. But you kept the building we're moving into. And a few others. Enough to help people who need it." Sarah brushed crumbs off her coat. "The newspaper called you a hero." "The newspaper called me a lot of things. Most of them worse." "Which one's true?" James watched the woman and her children eating their sandwiches. "I'm just someone who finally looked up from my own lunch." His phone buzzed. A message from Patricia. "Peterson's sentencing tomorrow. Sarah still okay to speak?" "I'm scared," Sarah admitted, reading over his shoulder. "But Mom says sometimes being scared means you're doing something important." "Smart Mom." They sat quietly, watching people walk past. Some nodded hello now, instead of hurrying by. The park had changed, or maybe just the way people saw it. A group of kids played near the fountain, wearing coats from the foundation's winter drive. The woman and her children talked with a shelter outreach worker who'd spotted them. "Mr. James?" Sarah's voice was soft. "What happens next?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "With everything. The foundation." "Mom." "The park." "Well," James leaned back on the bench. "The foundation's opening a new center next month. Job training, childcare, whatever people need. Your mom's helping design the programs. And you?" "I'll be here, sharing lunch, watching out for people who need help." He smiled. "Someone taught me it's important to really see people." Sarah stood up, brushing off her coat. "I should get back to school. Mom's picking me up after." "Need a ride?" "No thanks. It's only 3 blocks. And I'm not scared of walking anymore." James watched her go, confident in her new coat, head high. She stopped to talk to the woman and her children before leaving. His phone buzzed again. A text from Mario. "Got 3 more kids in today asking for food. Foundation account covered it." Good, James texted back. Keep it going. The November sun warmed the bench. James unwrapped his own sandwich, the same order he'd always gotten, but it tasted different now. Better, somehow. Rodriguez and Brooks drove by again. This time they stopped. How's the hero business? Rodriguez asked through her window. Just sharing lunch, James said. How's real police work? Quieter since you cleaned up our park. Brooks grinned. Though we miss arresting you. Give it time. I'm still working on the Foundation's next project. Yeah. What's that? James nodded toward the woman and her children, now walking away with the shelter worker. Whatever people need. One sandwich at a time. The police car pulled away. James's phone lit up with Foundation business, budgets, programs, plans for expansion. But he didn't check it right away. Instead, he sat on his bench, eating his sandwich, watching his park. Really watching. Really seeing. A month ago, his life had revolved around quarterly reports and board meetings. Now it revolved around shared lunches and second chances. Sarah was right. He wasn't rich anymore. Not in money, but sitting in the November sun, watching people find help they needed. James Morrison felt wealthy in ways his CEO self had never imagined. He finished his sandwich and stood up. Time to get back to work. Real work this time. Important work. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Sarah. Thanks for lunch. See you tomorrow. James smiled, typing back. Same bench. Same time. I'll bring extra sandwiches. After all, you never knew who might be hungry, who might need help, who might just need someone to look up and really see them. One sandwich at a time.